Do you face decisions in your life that often leave you second guessing yourself? Do those decisions often leave you wondering, was it right to make that decision? This is At the Root of Knowledge, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about the state of contemporary ethics.
Hello and welcome to At the Root of Knowledge, where we discuss timeless topics. Through conversation, we try to identify underlying principles and assumptions beneath many of mankind's ideas and beliefs. All this in pursuit of understanding and to share what we learn with you. Please keep in mind that we are not experts, and just like you, we're here to learn. I'm Daniel Sheck, and with me is my co-host, Philip Rabarzik. How are you doing, Phil?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I am fantastic, my man. Absolutely wonderful.
It's good to hear. I'd like to wish all our listeners a happy new year, and to apologize for the
Continued delay.
the continued delay. We've had numerous technical difficulties, but I think we've got it pretty well squared away now.
Yep, we got some new equipment. We had to change up the software. Our old equipment was failing us, and we lost our recording information quite a few times, so we had to transfer everything to a new computer, because it kept dying on us.
Yeah, for lack of a better word, it just the system would just kind of shut down.
Yeah, this is what, the third time or the fourth time, third time recording.
I believe this is the third time we've tried to record this episode.
Yep.
Yeah, for a bit there, it seemed like we were just not supposed to record this episode.
And the last one, we got like 45 minutes in before it shut off.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're like, oh, so close. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you excited to talk about today's topic?
Yeah, I'm excited. A little bit nervous. I don't know if I can quite do it justice. I know I wrote one paper this past semester on some of the state of ethics in our culture, but it was more a general paper as opposed to, we were hoping today to go a little bit more in depth into different industries and how you can see ethics, the state of ethics or the lack of ethics in different industries, like the entertainment industry for one.
Let's see. So, did you just tell me that you're the expert on ethics?
I would not claim that, no.
Okay. Well, maybe you'll have to pretend for today.
I will do my best.
All right. So I guess to start off, where would you like to start the conversation?
I'm fine with starting with the entertainment industry. I think it's a good example of something that everyone has a pretty decent amount of exposure to, I'd say. I mean, obviously some people follow more closely with different types of celebrities or music producers and things like that, but I think for the most part you still meet a lot of people who know somewhat about the entertainment industry, know some, for instance, actors.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's start there then. So, I feel like this is we could go a lot of different ways with this idea, this topic. So, what about the ethics in the entertainment industry would you like to talk about?
Well, I mean, for one, you see a lot of at least I see a lot of people who would call themselves celebrities or and similar titles having a lot of influence in our culture today, and them using that influence. You see that even in even with a lot of current day sports players. Many of them have a lot of influence and are very active in all sorts of different issues in our society, other than political ones. Although political ones are a great example of how active people are in our even and
Do you think that's part of the entertainment industry's job?
mm,
See,
no,
we could take this a few
I
different ways.
don't think it's strictly part of the entertainment industry's job. It may be a optional responsibility that they can undertake. I think taking an ethical approach is for anyone. Anyone can take that approach,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's more often than not a good approach to try and take.
Mm-hmm.
But there are definitely a few different ways that people draw, a few different sources, I'll say, that people draw their ethics from.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's different theories on ethics and ethical behavior,
Mm-hmm.
such as, some people draw their ethics from philosophies like those of Aristotle and Plato.
Mhm.
They had quite a few writings, I should say, on what you would call virtue ethics.
Virtue ethics, what's that?
Virtue ethics is, in my understanding, basically placing the good as what we would consider virtues. So in our virtue versus vice series, when we talked about humility and
Pride.
pride, exactly, the ethical thing to do would be to act in a humble way.
Okay. So how does, I guess, okay, so virtue ethics, is that simply, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. Is that simply saying that the virtuous behavior is ethical? Or is that saying, what's that exactly mean?
I believe so, yes. That it is that which is virtuous is ethical.
Now, in these virtue ethics, do you have any idea if there's any definition to what virtue is? Like,
I couldn't
what are the
give you
defining
a
characters?
definition off the top of my head now.
Okay. All right. Well, I wasn't sure if you, not to get down a rabbit hole, right? But I think being, a Catholic, I believe that it's my conviction that there are certain standard rules of ethics, right?
Yes, but you draw those standards of ethics from religion, then,
Yes. Yeah.
which is another, I would say, valid source for ethics.
Right.
But
Right.
now there's people who would argue that religion is not necessary to have ethics,
Right.
and there is some evidence to support that even.
Right. Well, the thing is, even you can draw your ethics, and I'm just speaking as a, flawed individual with, limited understanding, but you can draw your ethical rules, as it were, from religion exclusively. And if it, and it could be at least in the circumstances of Catholicism, it's an inclusive, like it dictates what's ethical in pretty much every situation. Maybe not necessarily play by play. You have to apply the principles, right, to the situations to come up with an ethical choice, if you follow kind of what I'm saying. But it can be, you can draw your decisions from your ethical rules, as it were, from religion, and still comply to ethical natural laws. And I would say, in fact, that's exactly what I try to do.
Right.
The Catholic faith is the ethical natural laws, the rational rules, at least as far as I'm able to comprehend, are completely congruent with the rules, the religious rules, the doctrines of faith, the commandments of God.
Right. And it may very well be. But tying this back to the entertainment industry, I was trying to draw the at least somewhat of a connection to how many celebrities, I won't name any, but there are many celebrities who seem to have the carpe diem mentality, which I would say roughly translates to live now and live while you're young. Live impulsively, live for pleasure, and
right.
pay no attention to tomorrow.
I would agree, and
I would say that's somewhat telling for the current state of ethics in the entertainment industry. Now I'm not saying that that's a blanket statement, that just because some celebrities seem to act that way and seem to act that out in their movies, or they seem to sing about that type of thing,
right.
doesn't mean that the entire entertainment industry is doing that. But there is definitely the presence of that.
And I would agree with you. And I would say that's that extends beyond just the entertainment industry, obviously. But
Yes.
I would say yes, that's very much glorified. I think that there are, so live for now and kind of enjoy yourself. I think there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, I think the main one, where that stems from, is kind of the rejection of higher authority, right? I think that might not necessarily be where it stems from. I take that back. It stems from human nature, I think. But I think that it is rationalized as being ethical because there is no concept of authority beyond yourself. There is no God to people in entertainment. It's just you are your own God. And so yes, I think that's why that belief is held, I think, by many people, why it can even be suspended, that belief in existence. But I think the root of that belief, live now, live by impulse, is human nature. And I think people, if it's from human nature, the impulsiveness of the desire to satisfy, gratify the senses, to live pleasurably. And I mean, that makes perfect sense if you don't believe in an afterlife or a God or any laws beyond what you determine to be a law for yourself. Why wouldn't you just live to enjoy yourself? I mean, what's keeping you from...
Well, then at that point, it only makes rational sense, because what's the other scenario there? If you're not living for pleasure, then are you just living in constant suffering?
No. Well,
Right,
maybe.
Maybe you are, but who would, if you have the choice between constant suffering and
Freedom.
constant
Pleasure.
pleasure,
Right.
why would you, if you are the God in your life, then
Mm-hmm.
why would you voluntarily choose suffering?
Right. Right. Unless
you knew that there was some reward that you would reap for it.
Exactly. Or, not everybody's brain is necessarily set up the same way. I believe in, the devil and the insane influences that I believe Satan have, but we won't get into that. I mean, just speaking from individual people's perspective, maybe some people actually draw pleasure from the struggle. So not necessarily is everybody that doesn't believe in a God, if you follow what I'm saying, or a divine power, or anything bigger than humanity, just because they don't necessarily believe in that doesn't necessarily mean that, in my opinion, that they live impulsively. Because maybe some people, the pleasure, the deeper pleasure, comes from denial, comes from restraint, comes from control of their behavior. Maybe that's where they draw their sense of power from, and their sense of purpose in being able to control something, and as it were, constrict their appetites.
Right, proving that they are, if you will, the master of their own destiny.
Yes, and feeding their pride too. I would think for many people, not saying that is more often the case, but I would say, the idea that there is a higher power. I'm a Catholic, and that's my firm conviction is in the truths of the Catholic faith. But for anyone that believes in God at all, and any rules beyond human nature, if they really believe that, then they would have to. If they really believe that, like with their soul, with their being, then they would have to live in restraint and to remain sane. It would just drive them nuts if they fed all their impulses. If they believed that feeding their impulses, if it were in a way that was opposed, I don't want to get too wordy or verbose, opposed to, a divine law, they would hate themselves, right? So that they would kind of have to have some sort of ethical behavior that limited their behavior insofar as it was opposed to divine authority, if that makes sense. But
I suppose it does.
I think that's a big part of the main reason why the entertainment industry is like that, is because there's no idea of God. There's no idea of really any authority beyond human nature. So basically, to wrap up that everything I just said. But also, there's another reason that I wanted to hit on with the internet, and we all have human impulses. We all have human impulses. Every single one of us. There's not a single one of us that isn't driven by the impulse to eat food, or
Although
drink water.
there are some of us that are affected differently by
Right.
it.
Right, but I mean,
For instance, people who have anorexia.
sure. I mean, but for the most part, they can count on people having, for example, a drive for sexual gratification.
Sure.
And I think the entertainment industry hits hard on that because it's so basic and common to everybody that they can exploit it. And I think that's one of the biggest exploitations of the entertainment industry is exactly that. Because
I think it's become that over time. I would say if you look back maybe 40, 50, maybe even 60 years ago,
much less
you
so.
can see much less of that,
Right.
and you can still see a lot of other things. And if you want to go back even further to when you can take like Shakespearean plays, for instance, there's still a like a plot for Shakespearean plays, and there's still a very good a storyline and you can see whether a story is a tragedy story or it's something like that, where and you don't see near as much exploitation on the sexual gratification part.
Right. Well, I've got some other ideas about that. Also, we only see. Okay, we go back to the 50s and whatever, and you can see whatever movies, that's recent enough history that you can still find whatever you want, pretty much in regards to books, movies, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But going back, especially as far as Shakespeare, and even going back further than that to Virgil and Aristotle, and back then to before Christ's time, and back even to Shakespeare's time, you only see the stuff that made it through history. You know what I mean? You don't see everything that happened, right? Now I'm not saying the state of ethics is good, and I'm not saying that it's not worse than it's ever been in history. I'm not saying that. It very well could be, and it would not surprise me at all. From my standards, objective standards of, based on the Catholic faith of ethics, I would tend to more believe that things are worse now than they have been through at least the majority of well-documented history. Is worse, right? But I can't say that, right? I haven't been alive. But not to go too far off, we only see what's made it through time to now. So you go back, you talk about Shakespearean plays. I mean, if it was a play that was just about sexual gratification, and that was the entire kind of appeal of the play or the book or whatever, would it have made it through history? I mean, maybe it would have. But I tend to believe that we see the great works we see nowadays from history because they had a great lesson to teach. They had some sort of inspiring.
It was.
Go ahead.
Well, that lesson was timeless then. It was a principle that you can apply then and still apply now.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And that's one of the main principles that you find in, among other principles, I'll say, but that one of the main principles that you can find in the Bible is sacrifice.
Right.
But by sacrifice one means that in giving something up or undertaking a feat that may cause significant suffering now, in the future one would be rewarded with hopefully a better to the giving up of something now in the hopes of something better tomorrow.
Right, and that would be an ethical principle that would be opposed to instant gratification and living by impulse.
Right.
Um, and that's right. I mean, the Bible. I haven't read the Bible cover to cover. I've read a large portion of it, you know. But yeah, that's a common thing throughout the entire thing is take control of yourself. You do not be
Right. And it's
controlled by your, impulses and your
correct.
emotions.
But that's not exclusive to Christianity either.
Right.
You can
No,
look
it's
at
not.
Buddhism. In Buddhism, there are many of the same or similar teachings of Christianity.
Right. Right. I mean, and if a principle, see, and I believe that
That's kind of what makes a principle.
a principle,
Right. That's what makes it archetypal.
right, is it's universally and it can be universally understood. Right. I mean, there's certain principles like the idea of fairness, right? Stephen Covey talks about this, but I mean, it's obvious. I believe God put understanding in everybody's mind. There's a certain laws that are kind of written in, as it were, I guess, our DNA, but more than that, in our soul. But right, I mean, we see it time and time again. Things like the idea of fairness, or getting paid your fair share for work done. These are, honesty, integrity. These ideas have existed cross-culturally, across multiple cultures throughout all of known history.
Right.
They certain virtues have been pointed at as being virtuous. That's good,
Right.
That's what we want.
And that's the one point that I would really emphasize, is that it's not just one culture that's making this. It's cross-culturally. It's different parts of the world that have had different influences at different times,
Mhm.
all seem to come together on this one thing. And a main thing that I, at least in that paper that I was talking about earlier, when I wrote that paper, I did a cross reference from different sources of ethics. So, to name a few: philosophy, religion, and biology,
Mhm.
and kind of cross-referenced those and found different sources that were pointing to these principles as the things that were congruent in each source. And I would say the main one among those was truth,
Mhm.
and then short behind were the letting go of the ego,
Mhm.
or pride,
Right.
and then of a fairness, and to love thy neighbor as thyself, basically.
Right.
Those were the three things that I was able to find that really
We're common.
were, yes.
Right. Right. Okay. Well,
And that was just from a like, I would say a month or so of research, and not a month of straight research, a month of research, maybe doing 2 or 3 hours a week.
oh,
So it's definitely,
considerable amount still.
yes, but the sources are definitely out there that show that.
Right. Right. And I think you're right. And I mean, I didn't do the research. I couldn't, but it makes sense, because for me it makes sense because I believe those things are written on the soul of man, and man has to ignore them
Mm-hmm.
or live around them, as it were, to not believe that. I think he would be lying to himself, or have corrupted, by choice, whether it be an outward choice or a passive choice, to not see those things, if that makes sense. But circling back, all those things you just mentioned, but circling back kind of into the entertainment industry and talking about the state of ethics, I mean, I would say, as far as like what the ethical laws are, I'm not an entertainment genius, but I would say the biggest ethical rule, as far as how the entertainment industry sees it, is attract attention. That's the ethical. That's the ethical rule.
I would say attractiveness, just in general.
Right. Well,
Something
get
something has
eyes
to
on.
be attractive to the audience.
Right.
So that's kind of the rule, is be attractive or create something that is attractive.
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I would not agree with that. I would say that that is a component, but I think it's more. I would say, just from an outsider looking at how entertainment works, they're more concerned about just getting attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be my belief. There's no publicity is bad publicity. I'm sure you've heard that before. But
Sure.
I mean, they want views. Not to get political, but you watch the news. How much news is in tune with reality, and how much of it is just getting people to try and listen? You know, it doesn't matter if it's. I don't think it matters if it's true or false, as far as, you know, the news is concerned. Our quote unquote mainstream media. It's not about sharing truth or informing the public. It's just about getting attention, getting people to listen. That's it. You know, and I would say the same thing with TV shows. Like, not to act like I'm all above this stuff, because I'm not, right? You know, I'm flawed. I'm not great, but you watch some of these TV shows, even some of them ridiculously popular TV shows, you watch it, it's like, this is stupid. This is absolutely retarded. Why? How has this passed for entertainment? And people watch it. And I mean, I've even been stuck in that same thing where it's like you start watching the show, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're stuck watching it. It's like, why? It's so dumb. It's not about, I think, because the people making these shows, and they're not so much concerned about being attractive or even making like a, you know, attractive product. It's just about getting attention. That's all they care about. And different pieces of the entertainment industry obviously target different markets, just like any sort of market. You know, they got a target audience. They know some people aren't going to watch these stupid, I'll say it, stupid soap operas, these stupid reality TV shows that are just, all right, sure, you can say it's my opinion, but a lot of them are just retarded. To be blunt, and people might not like me for that, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just don't appreciate the beauty of these shows, I guess. But, you know, different shows, they know some people aren't going to appreciate that, so they'll, you know, Netflix, for example, they'll have some shows that attract an audience of people that like those soap operas, the people that like those reality TV shows, people that like the more documentary type of movies, people that like, and then there's still a market for people that want movies that actually talk about real stuff and point out real issues in human nature, you know, and you know, kind of have a real lesson to them. So there's a market for multiple things, but I think the string that holds them together, if you want to call it, I would consider it the ethical stream of media by today's standards, is just get attention.
I'm not sure if I completely agree with you, but
yeah, I could be wrong. But if I had to say,
but you bring up a good point, and you don't, and it doesn't seem like a weak argument, at least from what I've heard from you just now. So
right, well, maybe if I had, you know, somebody here from CNN or Fox News to argue, maybe I wouldn't be able to hold up my end so well. But that's just how I see it. You know, that's what I think.
Okay. So moving on from the entertainment industry, then,
Mm-hmm.
what about in economics?
Okay.
So economics, we've seen in my lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
we saw the housing market collapse.
Right.
We see the national debt
Mm-hmm.
The national debt keeps climbing and climbing, and what to me that doesn't seem very ethical. I mean, to
Plunge debt in the country into debt so that people are going to have to pay for it later.
well, that goes back to the idea of living for the moment.
Right. It does. Yeah.
Not only that, it there's many ideas there. I mean, you can take the idea of the borrower is slave to the lender.
Right.
Now, in our case, it doesn't seem like we're slave to the lender yet, but at some point, it comes back to that same idea of living for now, and eventually that is going to come due.
Right. Well. Right. I feel like we live in like a blame-free society. And you're gonna have to bear with me as I kind of think through this argument. Kind of a blame-free society, a society where don't judge. But right, you see it from all the way down to the individual level. The amounts of debt now versus 50 years ago, at least in the United States, and I don't know about other countries, way higher than it was 50 years ago. Way higher.
That's
People
true.
were not borrowing anywhere near as much money.
And I would argue, if you could reference anything now and then reference it 50 to 70 years ago, and you would most likely find better ethical standards. Not all. I will not. I don't want to make the blanket statement that all ethical standards 50 years ago were better.
Right. And who's to say what country you're looking at? You know, our
Right.
perspective is
Or what class you're looking at either.
right. Right.
But for instance, the divorce rate. You see families being torn apart nowadays, and
Right. The divorce rate's higher than it's ever been before.
correct.
Well,
And so you cross reference that to 50 to 70 years ago, when it was extremely low
mm-hmm.
and frowned upon, and I think it should be frowned upon.
Right. Well,
You know, I was having a conversation this past week with one of my brothers about marriage, and he asked me what I thought what I thought a marriage was. And I think he was trying to make a point about the difference between a marriage contract that one would sign and a marriage vows. And I'm still not sure. I still don't quite comprehend the point that he was making. But anyway, I told him that I thought that a marriage was a commitment. It was a lifetime commitment.
right. Right. I think that's part of it. I think
I mean, that's not everything that a marriage is, but
right.
my point is that if a marriage is a lifetime commitment, then if you believe that something is a lifetime commitment, that means that there is not a way out of it.
Yeah, and that's crazy that you say that, not to diverge too much from the point you're trying to make, but I just wanted a side note. I've heard people say, yeah, I believe marriage is for life, from people that have had legal divorces. And I hear that and I just shake my head and I'm like,
That's
and they get remarried.
That's just about the definition of hypocrisy.
Right, but that's kind of today's. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Right, and
it is, and I don't want to divert too much, but it gets me onto this other idea of being able to just hit a reset button. And I've had instances where I've been in a group of people and they have something will come up about some of my earlier teen years where I did not act very well at all, and for the most part had no respect for authority. But anyway, and one instance in particular, someone said something to the effect of, "Well, nothing before the past year and a half," because that's about when I started acting better. I'll say.
Gotcha. Trying to move. In the right direction.
Nothing before the past year and a half counts or whatever. And I don't think that's true. I do not think that's true at all. I think you can't just say, well, I was acting poorly then, and now I'm better.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has to be continual, and even so, there's still something to be said for someone who acted that way.
Right. I think there's something to be said for both ways. I think,
I mean, yes, there's something to be said for someone who acts very poorly and then turns their life around.
mhm.
There is something to be said for that. But there's also something to I think there's more to be said for the person who never acted poorly despite being tempted to act poorly
Uh-huh.
and continued to act correctly throughout their life.
Right. One thing I would like to say, if I could, I believe that the victory is in the journey, not the destination. In pursuit, it's a moving thing. I think, you don't aspire to an end and then reach it, and then you go, now I'm fulfilled. You aspire to be moving in a certain direction, and moving in that direction, you will be fulfilled. Because I believe this world is, very finite and limited, and it's not important. There's nothing here that will satisfy your needs for growth and for fulfillment and satisfaction. It's only in pursuit of those things that you will be happy on the journey. That's one of the points I'd like to say. And then we were talking earlier about,
I don't know if happy is the right word to use.
Fulfilled,
I would
satisfied.
say satisfied or find meaning in it.
Uh-huh. Sure.
I would say, well, because when you say happy to me or happiness, I don't think of a feeling satisfied or feeling meaning in what I'm doing. I think of the emotion of being happy,
Right.
laughing and
Emotions fleeting. Depends on how you look at happy. Depends on how you define happy. I understand what you're saying, and I think you're right. That wasn't the best word to use.
okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
And I agree with you. I was wrong. Or maybe just not as well placed words as I should have been. But and then the other thing you were talking about, your past. How much does your past matter? Looking back, I think your past is critically important. People just say it's in the past, don't look at it. I mean, right. You cannot be caught up in the past because the past is behind you, right? And the only thing that's going to make any difference that you can do to make any difference is what's you're in control of, which is what? Right now. So that's where your focus should be, right now, always, right now. What do I do right now? What plans do I make right now? And, there's no point in being caught up in the past or the future. But with that being said, I think it's important to keep both in mind. The future, because you want to be able to set up a path between now and the direction you're moving, right? If fulfillment comes in moving in a direction, well, then you have to be looking forward towards something, right? You can't just be shooting at nothing. So you have to look at the future to get that direction. Now, in regards to the past, you're blind without the past, is my belief. If you disregarded the past, you'll never move forward. I think because past.
I don't know that you'll never move forward. You might be able to stumble forward, but I don't think you'll move forward well if you don't learn from the past.
Right.
And I would say that's because that's where your experience is.
And when
you go to get a job, you type up a resume, which is a summary of your experiences.
Right.
Your professional experiences.
Right.
And with that, they expect you to have knowledge there.
Right.
And so there's the idea there that the past is like a place where knowledge is stored.
Right. I agree with that. And even further than that, it's also your past is also your detriment, right? So let's say someone develops an addiction to something, right? That's in the past, right? But now they have the proclivity to go back to it, right? So if even as much as the past can be useful to you, it can be destructive, and you have no control over that. I would say to some, not no control, but no control of the fact that it's there. You know what I mean? When you, there's certain things linger, and you just can't help it. I don't think you can help the fact that you got addicted to something, and now you have to stay away from that substance, because if you go around it again, you're going to use it, and you're going to abuse it, and you're going to end up in the exact same spot.
Right. And
So
I,
just as
well, I
much as
think,
it can be a tool, it can be a device of destruction. And
I think so. And
you
I
have
mean,
to
one
go
one
ahead.
exercise that I do every now and then is to this is for me to remind myself that I'm still on the path to becoming better, and that I need to continue on that path, that I'm not good enough where I am,
Right.
is to put myself in the same situation. Well, not put myself in the same situation, to imagine myself in the same situation that I may have been in, where I made one of my biggest mistakes, and really, really think, would I make that mistake again?
Right.
And, well, I won't say all of the time, but most of the time, I still wind up thinking to myself, yeah, I would probably make the same mistake again, despite knowing
Better.
better and knowing the outcome. I would still probably have made the same mistake. And that's, to some people, that may not be a very encouraging thought, but to me, that it's encouraging in that I know, I now see,
Your weakness.
I see my weak. Exactly.
Right.
I know where I need to improve on,
Right.
because one day I may come across the same situation, or a very similar situation, or a worse situation,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe I need to be ready for that.
Right. And I think that's an excellent point that you just made, and one that can't be stressed enough, is the past shows us our weaknesses. I've been there before, and I know many other people have been too. You just put confidence in your own strength. You think, I can do it. I can do it. And you tell yourself, I can do it. And you keep. The past shows you you're not strong. And it shows you where you're weakest. See, I believe all strength, all goodness comes from God, right? But and I believe that the past, if nothing else, just for me, shows me that I'm weak. I'm not capable by myself. It shows me my own frailty, and that's not a popular idea nowadays. That's not a popular idea. You're weak. To look down on your own nature, to look at yourself as being not strong. It's popular to go, no, you're strong. You can do it. Feed your pride. Shovel coal into your ego to keep it burning at a record high temperature.
That's the thing that I think you can see in. I know we have a lot of industries that we had planned on talking about, and I don't know that we'll get to all of them in this.
We'll see where we get with time.
Yeah. So, but the one idea that I really see in everyone, and not if in everyone, most of them at least, is that idea of that you were talking about, of pride. And yet so many different philosophies and religions and just thoughts in general on ethics, like I said, was about the letting go of the ego and the necessity for humility.
Right.
And it's really interesting to look at something like Buddhism, that's an Eastern philosophy and an Eastern religion.
Mm-hmm.
To look at something like that and to see how they have a something called the Noble Eightfold Path, and it's seen as the way to minimize and eventually, I suppose, end all suffering. And it talks about how one should act correctly in the world. And one of the first things is to let go of the ego. That's seen as the way to end suffering. And you look around at all the people who are suffering, and how much pride they have in, and I think it's interesting. I don't want to say that the number one cause of suffering in the world is pride, but it does seem that there is a considerable amount of suffering due to pride.
Right. Right. And like you said, even in non-religion, I don't think Aristotle complied to any specific religion. He didn't preach about the Greek mythology or anything like that. Did he?
I don't believe so.
And I believe it was Aristotle. It was one of the Greek philosophers. It was, but I am fairly certain it's Aristotle. Said something very similar to the effects of, I can't be certain of much, except that, or if I know anything, it's that I don't know anything. Something to that effect. But basically, you know.
That sounds very, very familiar, but I'm not sure if it was Aristotle. It sounds like something Socrates might have said.
Maybe it was Socrates.
I believe it was. Socrates was known for asking a lot of questions.
Right, and that just shows you right there. That is the complete, I would say, not necessarily the complete, but a huge, like, saying my pride is worthless. What do I know? You know what I mean? What can I be so arrogant as to pretend like I have control and comprehension over? And did Socrates? I'm fairly certain Socrates didn't comply. Socrates was the one that drank the hemlock, right? That was Socrates. Yes, I think so. He was forced to drink the hemlock. I'm pretty sure that was Socrates. He didn't comply to any religion either. I
don't believe so. I know at one point he was this has nothing to do with religion, but he was accused at one point of corrupting the Greek youth.
Uh-huh. I think that might have been part of why he was executed. It's unfortunate.
But it's
interesting. It's natural. What I'm getting at is that's natural. That's part of human nature to come to that conclusion.
Right, but it's interesting to see someone like Socrates who was is so well known,
mm-hmm.
and yet had, like, you don't hear. I would say you don't hear a lot of people talk about Socrates and how he died, at least. But you hear a lot of people mention Socrates. And what's interesting about the way that he died is that he was accused of something, and then pretty much all of his friends told him that he should flee, that he should run. And he saw that as a form of, I believe he saw it as a form of lying.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw it as admitting that he was guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So instead he stayed and he was executed.
Right. Right.
And that shows you that, well, for one, that shows you the standards that he held himself to.
Right.
Yeah, that he really thought he was believing in something that was archetypal, we'll say.
And it would lend you to believe that his belief, his ethics, as it were, pointed to something beyond here and now, right? If he's willing to give up his life for it, you would think that would be an indication that he's thinking that there's more important things than just your life and what you experience.
Right.
I would say that is compliance or submission to the idea that there is authority beyond human nature. I would believe that would be an indicator of that. Maybe that's misinterpretation of the history. I wish I knew better. I knew more at one point back when I was in high school, and unfortunately I forgot a lot about the Greek philosophers and what they believed. For all I know, Socrates could have complied to, for all I know, he could have complied to the idea that there is, one God. I don't know.
I can't say that I know either.
I don't remember. I feel like I definitely learned about
I know that much of what Socrates was talking about and what he was trying to find out that was carried on with Plato and Aristotle after that.
Yeah, one thing I do remember about Socrates, Aristotle, all them was their willingness to question. Exactly that. Their humility, their understanding that pride was destructive, or at least the ego had potential to blind, because from everything I remember about them, they were always asking questions, and they never put faith really in their understanding as being godly. You know what I mean? To have some sort of, a humble sort of approach to learning, and in recognition of their own weakness. Just trying to add to the point we were saying about dissolving the ego. Right, so we kind of got off track. Economics, specifically, I would say one of the economic rules, as it were, kind of tying together with the idea of what we were saying about industry, is making money, obviously.
Yeah, that was the point that I was going to make, would be profit.
Right. That would be the ethical rule that I would see that industries economically
well you look at any business, any financial entity. If it's not making money, it is shut down.
Unless it's a non-profit.
Well, yes.
Unless the purpose
if
isn't
it
to
is
make
hemorrhaging money, I'll say, then it, for the most part, it is shut down.
Right. Okay.
Unless you're going with a not-for-profit.
I would say that another ethical law that definitely not all industries, not all companies comply to, but more economically throughout history, that you would see, is to gain control of a market and give yourself a competitive advantage over others. If you can have a competitive advantage, be it fair or unfair, anyway, then you can control the revenue. If you can have a competitive advantage, then you can control the market. Whether that's by making a monopoly, like Google has largely done, I believe. They have a competitive advantage of being able to, we talked about this in the past, see better than anyone else what will sell. That's their biggest competitive advantage, I think, is being able to see into the minds of people. They know what people are looking up. They know what people are trying to, what people are thinking, really. I mean, Google owns so much. They see, like, okay, people are interested in this. People think this, and they have, and not only can they see that, they have control over what people see, what the people see, because Google, it controls both sides. It sees what's popular, and it decides what are we going to show people at the same time. What are we going to, I think Google, as I believe any industry would do if they had the potential, without, I say divine intervention. Without divine intervention, I believe Google's doing exactly what any industry would do without divine authority in it, is controlling the market to generate profit. And where's that profit coming from? This isn't a political podcast, right? But you could say it's coming from anywhere. And it's not outrageous to believe that maybe they're being incentivized by the government. It's not religious, because I believe that another ethical, quote unquote ethical, if you want to call it that, principle of economics is to make money. And it doesn't matter if it complies with what is popularly accepted as virtuous, because I think that the principle of making money comes above that. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were being incentivized by the government to lie to people, to feed them, to try and brainwash. And in fact, I mean, in my personal belief, that's exactly what they're trying to do.
Perhaps so, perhaps not. But
I'm just
I
getting to
don't
the
know how
principle. I'm just trying to make the point. I'm not right. Like we're not.
It could be.
I'm saying that principle is one of the overriding principles, even
is profit.
Right, and
Yes.
and that even comes before, left to its own devices, economic entities, as it were, left to their own natural operating procedure without influence from other people, that will override moral behavior, truly ethical behavior. That will be the principle that will take over, is making money and controlling the market in which they are existing, if that makes sense.
I suppose it does.
I was just trying to use Google as an example.
Right. No, I think you're right as far as economics goes. I think profit is the pretty much the end all be all for anything economic. When you I mean, I think you did a pretty good job of summing it up there. So without taking up too much more time, I would we have 3 more topics left, but I think we can skip to the last one for now.
Okay.
So ethics in the home life, in the life of the individual.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have anything you'd like to start with?
Well, I already talked about one thing, which was the divorce rate.
Oh yeah.
That's a big, that's very telling for me.
Mm-hmm.
When you see that, when you see someone making as I said, when you see someone making a lifetime commitment to someone makes a vow. Obviously, there's other things that go into a marriage,
Right.
and I understand that there's complications that happen and
Difficulties.
yes, difficulties, but a lifetime commitment is, regardless, it's a lifetime commitment.
Right. You can't just erase that.
Moreover, I would say you can't just erase it and make a new one.
Right.
That's the big thing that I have now. If a very specific scenario, if 2 people were to be married, they both said their vows, and then one were to break the vows.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't believe that gives the other one
Freedom.
I don't believe that gives the other one the authority to break theirs.
Right.
I think regardless of whether someone breaks a vow to you, you still made that vow to them.
Right. You're still responsible for your decisions.
Yes, but I don't believe that it gives you that. But I do think it gives you for instance, if 2 people were to be married and one of them were to go and cheat on that person,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that gives you the authority to go and
Cheat back.
cheat back, exactly. But I don't think it also I do think it gives you the decision on whether you really want to continue that relationship with them. I think if you made a vow to someone and they were to break that vow, I don't think you necessarily have to take them back. Now, I don't think you can go and make that vow again to another person, but I'm not
Right.
I don't think that you can that you have to, because of that vow, I don't think you're required to just forgive them for what they did,
Right.
especially when it's breaking a lifetime vow.
Well, and right. I mean, you cannot. Why would you stay in a relationship if you're just going to contribute to somebody not fulfilling the purpose of the relationship, right? Why would you stay around? You made a vow, and you have to keep that vow. And I believe that, and the big point I'm going to lead up to, I believe that you're still obligated to honor that vow, especially for the sake of the children. You cannot do anything contrary to that vow. But if living with your wife and she's still going to keep cheating on you, why would you perpetually contribute to a relationship that's, damaging? It's no good, right? Why would you? And I think it's excusable to walk away from that person, but I think marriage is beyond that, regardless if they cheat. I mean, that's unfair, sure. That's horrible. Yes, that's absolutely terrible. That's a horrible thing to have happen to you, which is why it's so important to pick the right person. But you're still married to them. You made a vow for life, and it doesn't matter what the other person does. You're still married to them.
Right.
So you can't go marry. I think the best you can, all you can really do is say this person is damaging to my health, and I have to preserve my own soul, or even my own well-being, my own health. If they're going to abuse you or abuse the children, right? You've got responsibilities. But right, you can't break that vow. You can't. It still doesn't justify breaking the vow of being perpetually united, as long as one of you is living, as long as both of you are living. But the point I would really like to make, not to dive, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
To the marriage part?
Yeah.
No.
The point I would like to make is, I think the reason that the divorce rate is so high. Okay, so our entire society has not. I mean, and it's very big. This whole movement. You look back in the history, families weren't the same. Family isn't the same thing now as it was in the past, and I think a lot of that is due to technology and due to our advanced ability to exist independently because of progressions in technology and stuff like that. It's much easier to just go off and live on your own. You go back in the history, families stuck together much more tightly than they do today. Not saying that but it wasn't uncommon for, you live with your parents and you stay with your parents until you get married. And this was how it was in many cultures, until you got married. And then you go and you live with your spouse. And then, when your parents get old and all their children are gone, they come back and live with you. And that's just how it was. Families stayed together. So it was families were a lot more tightly knit together. I think that's one part of it. Okay. So the isolation between families that is so common nowadays, I don't believe was, from all my understandings of history, nearly as common in the past. People kind of stuck together, villages, tribes, if you were, for the sake of preservation and health, because it was more necessary in the past. Definitely more necessary in the past, especially because of technology. It wasn't the same. There was less ability to exist on your own without other people, if that makes sense. And then I think another thing which is part of that, why the family's divorce rate is so high, there's no people grow up, and I think this is largely what's taught by the media, by not just the media, by a huge amount of society, by the government, I believe, not to get too political, by the education system, the public education system, the government-controlled education system, at least here that we have in the United States. among other things. There's a lot of other components that I don't think I'll be able to get to, but you look back in time, and family, from all my understandings and readings of history, was a responsibility, right? It was looked at as a duty to fulfill. It was a vocation, right? It, for the most part, that was what God, the purpose God gave you in life was to raise children in His image. Okay, not just that, but I believe God's a huge part of it, and I could go way into that, but basic principle, you existed for your family, right? That was your duty, that was your obligation. I think now the idea is having a family, getting married particularly, and I think that's where it starts. Getting married is about you and what you want for your life and about you being happy. It's not about you sacrificing your life for something great. And I think it comes back to God. But even having children, you know what I mean? That was much more. I mean, look at the rate of reproduction. You know, people get married. Oh, we're only going to have one kid, or we're going to have two, or we won't have any kids. Why are you getting married, right? That's another thing that got lost, right? The purpose of marriage is no longer about raising a family. It's about being happy with your wife. Largely, that's what it is. It's not about having children.
It's about being happy with your partner, I'll say.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
exactly that. Family
right.
doesn't mean what it used to mean.
Yeah.
Back in the olden days, you know, you got married, you had kids. As many kids as you had is as many kids as you had, and that was just what it was understood. It was there was a lot of things that were scandalous back, you know, even 50 years, much more scandalous then than there are now. You have an illegitimate kid now, whatever, you know. I mean, it's kind of like, oh, that wasn't the best way of going about it, but it's not like, you know, in the old days that was like, oh my goodness, if you get pregnant,
if you want to get technical, they weren't given a family name.
Right.
You were not part of the family.
That's how disgraceful it was, and I think that's a fantastic thing. Okay, not to shame. Like, I don't think you shame people. Everybody needs a route to success. You can't cut people off, right? But that is shameful because
perhaps you shouldn't shame people, but at the
Well,
same
not-
time
not
you have
shame
to
people.
you have to hold people to a certain standard.
right, not
There
shame.
if you're not going to, and if there's not going to be any repercussions for breaking that standard, then why would anyone hold up to that standard?
Right. Not necessarily that you should shame the people, but, you know, at least the society admits that it's a shameful act, because now you're left with the situation where the kids, because we're so selfish, you know, I feel like the children are like a secondary aspect to the whole family part of it, whereas being the primary part, marriage protects the child. Marriage protects the child. You know, the divorce rate being so incredibly low, like divorce was barely a thing. You go back 200 years compared to nowadays, whereas now it's like, whatever, you get divorced, remarried as many times as you want. It protected the children, you know what I mean? The children had a mom and dad. Even if mom and dad went through tough times, they still had a mom and a dad. Now it's not so much the case. And it's terrible. Marriage, family, isn't about raising children, you know? That's not... What else would a family be for if not for... to reproduce, you know? To make a family. That's not what family is. I think we have a perverted, and, you know, I think the Catholic Church, honestly, I think that's the New Order, you know. I think that the New Order was a huge part of bringing in the divorce rate. You look at, you know, not to get too much in Catholic history, but you look at Vatican II, and that's where the divorce rate started to skyrocket, when Vatican II happened. I won't get into that, but I think that's really one of the biggest why that started to happen.
Yeah,
'Cause
I'd have to look into that a bit more to be able to provide any insight into that.
Well,
But I don't think I don't think marriage is the only thing that you can point to as something that's telling for the individual. I mean,
No,
you can look at stuff like crime rates.
I think that's where it starts, though. I think what I would consider the degradation of ethics in family life starts with that, and it's a lot of other things too. I think.
Well, I would say that there's good reason for that. I would say that there's more than good reason. There is evidence that you can say that that's the way it is. I mean, if a child is raised to believe that something like marriage is a sacred thing, that is a vow that cannot be broken, it's a lifetime vow,
Mm-hmm.
and then they've been taught all these other things by their parents as well. All these things that are supposed to be tell them the difference between right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then your parents go and break the vow that they made that made you who you are. So it's like, well, I thought that was a lifetime vow, but it's not.
Right.
So that was wrong. And if that was wrong, how much of the other stuff that you told me was wrong?
Right. There's no credibility to what your parents taught you if they're hypocritical in their behavior.
Right. Exactly. That's like me saying that you need that the thing that all religions and philosophies and sciences point to is truth as being one of or the most important ethical standard, and then going and lying straight to some of my closest friends.
Right. Hypocrisy breeds conceit.
But
Contempt.
I think you are right that the family is where things start to break down, and once things break down there, you start to see things like the increase in crime rate. Although that's not the only thing that you see as a result of broken families.
Right.
I mean, you see incredibly resentful people can become incredibly resentful.
Mm-hmm.
You can see, obviously, you have the relationship between the parents being torn apart, but you have relationships between children and parents being torn apart. And then when you have something like a second marriage, I wish I could remember the statistic, but it's a very shocking statistic, the amount of children who are abused by a step parent.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yep. I believe you're right. I mean,
So
we could talk for hours, I think,
yes.
about just family, because I think it is that important and it is that telling. I think there's so much wrapped into what happened to the idea of family. What happened to, and you can talk about technology, you can talk about a million different things, with just that, with just family life. We could even do an entire episode, I think, about how the family's changed. And right, I don't have perfect knowledge, and my knowledge is so largely limited to the culture I live in. But yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the one thing we should end on is, does the question, does the contemporary state of ethics, does it need to change?
Well, do you want me to give my answer first, then you give an answer?
Yes, I already have my answer thought out. So.
Okay. So does it need to change? I think, speaking as a Catholic, not just as a Catholic, as an independent individual able to think for myself, I'd say yes. Subjectively, objectively, yes, it needs to change if we want to progress as a society in a productive way. If we want to see divorce rate go down, if we want to see crime rate go down, if we want to see entertainment and media exploitation go down, if we want to see power hungry systems such as government and many big companies and members of the media allow for free communication and individual control, which I would say is the ideal, as much authority to the individual as possible, then yes. And more importantly, living for God, right? I that's the purpose why you're on this earth is to fulfill the purpose God gave you, right? And to follow his laws. That's my conviction. And I don't think modern ethics largely, right? Can't blanket statement it, but largely do that. You know what I mean? What's being taught, the most popular ideas, I don't think do that. So yes, I would say yes, it needs to change, but I would also say I have no authority to say it should change, because being a Catholic, a God-fearing man, if I dare say, a God-believing man, right? I'm no better than anyone else on this planet. I'll say that right now. I would say in many ways I'm probably worse than most people, really and truly. But if it's my belief, things will only get better if God wants them to get better, and I can't pretend to know the divine plan. Maybe things need to go badly. Maybe it needs to get so bad, and ethics need to go so far down the drain, and society needs to be so burnt and so painfully shooken, that it has no choice but to turn back to God. Maybe that's what needs to happen, is what I'm trying to say. I would say that. I'm saying, so to sum up, if we want things to get better, I believe it has to change, but not necessarily does it have to change, because maybe we need to be hurt to change things for the better. The divine plan is beyond our control, and it's beyond my comprehension, to sum it up.
That's fair. I would say that this state of ethics does need to change, and it should be a movement that should happen based on the different sources of ethics, not just any one source necessarily, because you can't. Maybe it could be done based on one source, but I don't think there would be a consensus if one source was chosen over any other.
Right.
I think
people need to be free to express.
Right. I think people need to see that. I think our culture needs to see that these archetypal principles that are taught by these different sources, whether they be religion or philosophy or biological reasons, that they are all pointing to this same thing, this same idea, and this idea has been they should be tested, and some of them already have been tested
through time, right?
Right.
That's why they keep coming back.
Exactly.
Right.
So that I think that is what should happen, is that we should come together and be able to identify these principles as things that are timeless and things that they are a necessity, and something like truth is something that I've been able to identify as something that should be exercised as often as possible, whenever whenever possible. And
Right.
if you're, I would say, if one is looking for a starting point on a ethical
Journey.
on an ethical journey, yes, on an ethical journey, to start with truth.
Right.
And by truth, I don't mean just telling the truth when you're talking to other people, or when someone asks you about something. I mean telling the truth to yourself as well, which is rather difficult sometimes.
Right. And you know what? That's exactly not. Just to add to that point, if you were to have asked me a how to that question, I would have said it needs to start with transparency, because we don't have transparency. I don't believe we have transparency today at all. I think we're
Well-
living in an age
well-
of such low transparency within
agree
people's
with you.
self. But I mean, you look at the government, there's no transparency. Who believes, I'm sorry, not to get political, who believes anything that's coming out of a politician's mouth nowadays? Nobody. Who actually believes the media? A few people.
But that's a good point.
We all
because
know there's no
it's
transparency there.
Regardless of what side you're on or your political beliefs, no one seems to believe anything that's coming out of anyone's mouth.
Because there's
Any
no
politician.
transparency.
Exactly. So I do agree. I agree that the truth is the.
I'd say
It-
before we have truth, we have to have transparency, though. Like if we want to expect to find the truth, we have to be transparent. We have to be transparent about everything: how we feel, what our motivations are, what we believe, where are we going with this. You know, what's our ends. I don't think there's transparency. I think transparency is at an all-time low. Maybe not the allest time low, but it's, you know, throughout all of history. But it's at a pretty low point. There's no faith in. There's no faith that anybody's being honest about anything, you know.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, and maybe once we're able to establish one timeless principle there, we can establish others. Like
Which
I
is
was talking,
protected. Go ahead, sorry.
like I was talking about with the things like the ego and pride,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I do believe that we should start with truth.
Mm-hmm. I would say we should start with transparency. I'm in pursuit of truth, but I believe you need to have transparency to get pursuit of truth, which is protected by, but is not limited by, your freedom of speech, right? I believe that's a God-given thing, right? Even if you don't believe in God, some entity, being, power of the universe. I mean, it's God. I know it's God, but other people might by constitutions. In America, it's the Second Amendment. But
First,
no, the First Amendment is the right to peaceably assemble. Oh, sorry. Right. Goodness, Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Sorry. Right. So is it the Third Amendment that's the right to peaceably assemble? Yes, I think so. I don't know. Anyway, First Amendment. Very important. Without that, thank you. I'm stupid, man. I don't know anything. But thank you for correcting me.
you're very welcome.
Right. So that's very important, and I believe, not to get too political, but I believe it is viciously under attack. By not just the government, not just the media. I think our society has gotten to a point where the freedom of speech is not your freedom. You know, you're free to comply with whatever authority says is okay to believe in. I think freedom of speech is important because you can't have transparency unless people can say what they believe openly and honestly. You know.
Hmm.
My 2 bits. Sorry, didn't.
Fair enough.
But yes, pursuit of truth. We need that. We need to pursue
That's
the truth.
what that was. That's
See, but there is-
that's what I think would be considered a noble journey.
Definitely.
Would be to pursue truth.
Right. But we're so. It seems as though it's become very popular to believe that you know there we shouldn't pursue that because of our pride. Not to start a whole new thing, because of our pride, the powers that be that want control, want to be able to write their own truth, because that's the only way to have control. If there's some truth that you have to comply to, then you lose control by definition, because you can't, so I think we live in a society where truth is, the idea wants to be eradicated. It's all relative, and that way we can write our own truths so we can control people. Roughly. Now, a closing thought from me. I'm done.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us and listening to our episode on the contemporary state of ethics. And I think we had some pretty decent conversation about what the ethics looks like in different industries. And unfortunately, we didn't get to all the industries we would have liked to have covered, but I'm think
sure some of this stuff will come back.
I'm sure it will. And I think we really hit on something with the state of ethics in the home life and in the life of the individual. So thank you for listening, and I'll leave it to you, Daniel.
Again, thank you for listening. We hope that you learned something, or at least thought about something. We encourage some level of thought. That's one of our intended purposes, is to encourage thought. I know I definitely learned something. We appreciate you listening. Maybe we got something wrong. Please let us know if we did. You can reach us on Facebook at The Root of Knowledge, also on Instagram and YouTube at The Root of Knowledge, or you can email us at The Root of Knowledge, all one word, @gmail.com. Till next time, have a great one. Bye.